Paradise Paradox, and I'm straight reckless. I'm a Native American wearing a strange headdress, playing tennis, jerking off to pictures of Elaine Bennis, causing accidents that'll break your fenders, romantic relationships fading embers. I ain't pretending. I got the ridiculous knowledge that'll make you jealous. 1, 2. All right. This is the continuation, the sequel of my last episode, my conversation with Mr. Link and Mr. J. And we got into a lot of stuff, so we're still talking about integrity and values. A man's got to have a code. So we talk about creativity, what it's like to have a scarcity mentality when it comes to creativity, the difference between the technique and the application, which is more important, the difference between technique and having heart, putting passion into your artwork, having self-awareness of your own art and why that's important, or the pitfalls to watch out for when you do that. And we talk about some hypothetical philosophical problems, the trolley problem, look at it from Mr. J's unique perspective, and we talk about, in some cases, why some principles must be overlooked in favor of other principles. We're also talking about having consensual sex with dolphins as a philosophical problem. So, all right, so remember, you can follow us and upvote us on Steemit, STEEMIT.com, /at paradise-paradox. Follow us on there and press upvote on a post. That helps us out a lot. To tell you a little bit about Steemit, it's a platform where you can go on there, get paid for posting, paid for voting on content, and it's good for artists, musicians, writers. So have a look, check it out, and you can get paid just for voting on our posts. So it makes it better than Facebook. Also, jump on to the paradiseparadox.com. We appreciate all of those tips that are coming in. Donate.theparadiseparadox.com. You can give us some dollars, some monetary units by PayPal or by Bitcoin. Send us a little token of your appreciation, and that's going to increase our power levels to over 9,000. Much appreciated. Let's get into it. I do a lot of writing and publish it somewhere, and if it doesn't get attention or whatever, then maybe I might feel like I'm a failure, or especially if it's something that I put a lot of work into. But then I say to myself, this is the way I normally phrase it. I'm drinking from a spring that never runs dry, and that spring is creativity, and that spring is also God, for lack of a better term. So it's something inside of us that can always come up with new ideas and new techniques, and that's available to everyone. But if you sit around and you're like grabbing onto what you have, like this sort of golem, like my precious, this kind of thing, you're never going to be able to realize that actually you have accessibility to this great wide range of information and knowledge and creativity.
It reminds me of this principle. Sorry, Link. It reminds me of this principle from martial arts training. I have a whole book of different codes from different schools, which is very interesting. But there's this one principle that you shouldn't be looking for a secret technique, or you shouldn't be looking to develop uh, some silver magical bullet or something, some way of fighting that will defeat all enemies, because that's not the way.
Hmm.
Uh, a successful strategy is a strategy that works whether or not your opponent knows about your strategy. Uh, and I really love this idea, and I think that it's the case. So often we concentrate on technique, and we want to hoard techniques and have these secret techniques, but greatness doesn't come from technique, it comes from application. And if somebody is great, they can make anything great. There's this other idea that you shouldn't desire splendid weapons. Uh, yeah, and again, I think it lines up with this other group of principles, whereby if you can only cut with an excellent sword, then you'll die on the battlefield. But if you can kill someone with a chopstick, you're much more likely to survive on the battlefield. You're much more likely to be able to adapt to circumstances rather than holding on to some preconceived technical virtuosity. And again, if you look at musicians, it's the most horrible thing to hear a guitarist masturbating on a guitar and just playing virtuistically, but not creating real music. It's very skillful, but it has no effect. I think art, like life, is in its effect. Like virtue is in its effect. It's not in the principle itself, but it's in the way that thing comes out into reality, or into the object of creation, be it art or life or whatever it is.
Yeah, which is kind of like the antithesis of, so you think you can dance and all the reality talent competitions, and why breakdancing, like I used to love watching breakdancing and I guess battle videos as well, but particularly like I loved watching breakdancing and these days, and beatbox competitions and stuff like that. But yeah, whenever I see them, I just have no interest in them these days, past maybe like a 30-second little clip, because there's no heart. Like it's all just this competitive technical shit, and yeah, like it's such a shame that our culture's obsessed with that, but but also puts it on a pedestal so that the idea of us refining ourselves and becoming technically brilliant isn't like the common person's aim.
Yeah, how do you resolve that paradox? I mean, why is that technical ability is so praised, but at the same time, for some reason, not desirable?
I think it's praised because it's something that you can develop without talent. I mean, it includes parts of talent because it includes like determination and perseverance,
Yeah.
but because it's this progressive aggregate way of doing something, you can always develop your technique, but you can't always develop your quality or your skill. And yeah, so often people will people concentrate on complexity, for instance. I was offended recently because I met a guitarist, and having a little bit of an absence of other creative people in my environment was really cool to have another guitarist around. And we only had one guitar, so we shared it between the two of us. But he liked complex guitar music. So when I played a song, he didn't really enjoy my playing. But when he played a song, I didn't really enjoy his playing because he wanted to play fast and complex, but he made lots of mistakes. But in his mind, because he was aware of the mistake that he was making, he would edited, I guess, in his consciousness so that he wouldn't hear all of these mistakes. But to me, being a performer and not just a guitarist, being able to play something well means being able to play something beautifully, not to play something complicated. And yeah, so it's this strange thing that happens when people get attached to ability on some level. Skillfulness is a beautiful thing, and maybe true ability is always skillful, but the way people try and develop their ability is not necessarily in line with skill. The show Red Dwarf, Lister is a guitarist, and there's a episode where there's some entity that can emulate other entities, but it does it by reading their mind and projecting into reality what they see inside the other person's mind. And the way they differentiate between the real Lister and the fake Lister is they get him to play guitar. And when the fake Lister plays guitar, it sounds awesome, because in his head that's what it sounds like when he plays. But when the real Lister plays guitar, it sounds like shit, because he can't actually play guitar. So yeah, I guess a lot of people are playing to the image in their head, and the way they convince themselves of the quality of it is narrow, and I think that's what creates this over grasping on technique, because you can compare your technique to your previous technique and feel great about yourself. Whereas if you record yourself and listen to yourself play, or if you can develop an objective ear and hear yourself play actually as you play, then you're a musician and not a technicalist. But I guess that's the thing about life, like how many people can look at themselves objectively. So much of what we do in our lives is to please the critic inside ourselves, who's not a very well developed critic.
Yeah, well, yeah. A mistake that I see in writers is that it's very close to what you're talking about. It's like they only read what they're writing from their perspective, and they don't manage to see it with the eyes of somebody else. So they have no idea how things will be perceived by other people, and that's the real challenge when it comes to communication. You have to have this empathy, this mental empathy of how others are going to perceive it, and if you don't, then you're going to say things which probably make no sense or are very, very confusing, or lead the reader in this completely different direction.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I disagree with that still.
Uh-huh.
I was helping a friend. I was editing this book that he was writing, and I think he suffered from an effect which is similar to that which you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
But the way I tried to help him was I described the writing process as like you imagine something, and in your imagination you create this beautiful jewel.
Mm-hmm.
And when you write, you're describing that jewel. But when you read your own writing, you can't compare it to the jewel inside your imagination, because when somebody else reads it, that jewel is gone.
Yep.
So I'm still very concerned about writing with a reader, like an actual reader in mind, because I'm concerned that I will then start writing with mediocre people in mind, and that will make my writing mediocre. Whereas if I just ensure that when I describe this jewel, that description itself becomes a jewel, then someone can read it, and if they have skill of reading, they will see my jewel. But if they don't have skill of reading, then they probably won't talk to me.
Right.
or continue reading what I write or caring about anything to do with my life. And these days I love the idea of winnowing, and the idea that people will save me from having to not save me from having to give them my time and give them my work. Yeah, it's easier if people turn their backs on me. And yeah, hopefully they're chaff, so to speak.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, think that relates to this idea that Link brought up years ago about when you meet new people, there are certain things you can ask them to test their character a little bit and see how open-minded they are, or see their level of thinking ability. And what the example that you had was like, why is having sex with a dolphin wrong if it's consensual? Yeah, yeah. And so it's yeah, you can kind of cut right to the chase and say these things in the first few conversations with somebody, and you'll find out pretty quickly what they're about. Like, personally, I like asking people about psychedelics, and I find out how open-minded people are, because yeah, I mean, certain people will say, I would never do that, even before I ask them if they would ever do it. And I'm like, okay, well, that kind of indicates to me that maybe you're not an adventurous person, and you're not an open-minded person. You're not willing to consider possibilities in the future and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I guess the function of that question specifically about having sex with dolphins was that, to me, objectively, the only way to answer that question is, of course, it's fine. Like, if it's consensual, like there's nothing in that question that suggests that it wouldn't be fine. But there's a whole bunch of suggestions in our culture that say that that's not fine. So just instantly, like, it's just a really easy way to see how, I guess, attached people are to culture, and whether or not they can look at things outside of their reactions to things, their cultural reactions to things. And it was fun. And like Jeremy and I had a series of these that we would bring out. And yeah, like I found it interesting because I was surprised at how many people were open-minded and were able to think about these things in different ways. And I guess especially I found that from young people.
I'm sorry, just to talk about the dolphins for a minute.
Let's talk about those shits.
I think now it's become for me a little bit of a more murky question, because of the idea of what's wrong. There's a famous a writer, Jeanette Winterson. She has this terrible memory from her adolescence, I think, when she's gay, and when she came out to her mother said, "Oh, why do you have to be gay? Why be gay when you could be happy?" And of course, this was a highly traumatic thing for a young woman trying to describe herself to her mother. But so I guess the question about the dolphin to me is not narrow enough, because for a person who isn't madly in love with this dolphin, it's probably better for them that they don't have sex with the dolphin. It will cause lots of complications and lots of difficulties in their life. It's not such. I don't think it's such a clear-cut question when you say objectively there's only one answer to it.
Yes. But I think there's a couple of different questions there.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like the straight up, what I'm talking about, the question is in terms of like ethics or morals, in terms of harm, I guess, is probably the easiest way to put it. The question is asked:
Like, is there a victim if you have sex with a dolphin consensually?
is this wrong due to harm? Basically, is the implication of it, I guess. But then that's even better. Like if that initial reaction either can be worked around or isn't there, then the issue can be discussed reasonably and rationally, like you just have there. Like there, of course, will be consequences, and there are all these other things to look at, which is the same with the vaccination stuff, the climate change stuff, any of the major contentious Facebook arguments that people have. Like if you can get past the initial part, there is probably some really interesting questions that maybe nobody has the answer to, and nobody has the justification to be actually passionate about.
It's interesting though, because that kind of question, what it does is it gives you a very accelerated snapshot into another person's framework of looking at decision making and their way of life, and how they deal with principles and codes. I mean, one of the beautiful things about modern science is that, real science looks at where things start to break down, where there aren't clear-cut answers to questions, and tries to create a clear answer to a question that doesn't yet have a clear answer. If you look at so many of the advancements in science, they've all been from these questions which make previous answers or previous codes or previous frameworks kind of wobble. So I guess maybe what we're looking for when we're meeting people is looking for people who are comfortable inside of these grey areas, inside of these smoky, shady parts of their life. I mean, a lot of people who have a code or a framework or a way of life, but it's dead, like we were discussing at the start of the conversation. They won't deal very well with these problematic parts of their own decision-making process. I remember the first time someone asked me the trolley dilemma. You know the trolley dilemma?
Can you just explain it for people who don't know?
Okay. So it's a thought experiment. It's ugly and hideous, and it's designed to create a certain kind of thought. Basically, there's a trolley running along a track, and it's heading towards a group of people. And there's no way for you to communicate with them, tell them get out of the way. In some versions of it, they're actually tied to the track so they can't avoid the trolley. But you have access to a lever which will divert the trolley from this track and therefore save the lives of these people in this group. But the track that it diverts to, there's a single person on it. And so if you pull this lever and save these people, you'll kill a person. And so that's the question. What would you do? Are you morally culpable by an inaction that results in the death of people? Are you morally culpable in an action that saves people but kills someone else who otherwise would have lived? I mean, it's quite beautifully set up. But the reason why I hated it as a question is because life doesn't work like this. What if the person that you'll kill when you save this group is the king of a country, or the Dalai Lama, or well, we have this idea that people are equal and you can reduce them to numbers, and that's one of the biases that sits in the assumptions of this question. So I got really angry, and at this point I started to think maybe I'm a replicant, because in Blade Runner he gets really angry when they give him the thing about the turtle and he can't flip over the turtle, and I wanted to find a way to save all of these fucking people. But the question isn't designed like that. But interestingly enough, my discomfort was highly amusing to the person who asked me this question, and the person who asked me this question is actually a textbook psychopath. And he was very happy because he had a beautiful beautifully justified moral reasoning in his answering of this question, but he found the answering of the question very, very easy. So me being very violent at the time and still hoping that I could help this psychopath grow a nub of a conscience and a nub of empathy, etc., etc., I pointed out to him that in my idea of ethics, it's not so important how you answer the question or what conclusion you come to, but how important you see the question. How important is it, this decision? It's not so much about the end result, but in the process itself. Do you care? So I think this comes down to it. At the end of the day, do you care about your principles? Do you care about your values? Do you care about your code and your way of life? Because it's easy to generate one or to have one, but if you don't care about it, then I don't think it serves any purpose. If you care about freedom, but then you'll subjugate your freedom for pleasure, and then when the opportunity for that pleasure is gone, then you revert back to your principle of freedom. I don't think that principle of freedom will serve you at all, other than justifying yourself and the image that you sculpt and polish for your own mind.
Yeah, that's interesting and hits home a bit when I think about when I go back to indulging in certain things that don't keep my life so smooth. With the thing you were mentioning before about like the company that you keep, in terms of if you're trying to develop certain principles and such, it's good to be around people who are heading in a similar direction or what have you. I guess with our culture, there is this concern, especially around, cults and, I guess surrounding yourself with like-minded people and then developing some kind of, closed-mindedness around that.
This bubble effect.
Yeah. But it seems like it's actually a really important thing to do. Like, do you think the bubble effect is such a risk, or is that only really a risk for people who are kind of sheep anyway? Or, I guess it's just a balance thing? Like, you don't...
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, if you're actively surrounding yourself with people who are open-minded, who ask interesting questions and are willing to consider new propositions without getting... emotional to the extent that it reduces, that it removes their ability to think, then at least in theory, you're not really going to have a bubble, because these people are always willing to throw things around from outside of their experience or new things.
Yeah, but I mean that's a cool bubble of friends and open-minded people. But I mean more in terms of like practicing with a particular school, joining an ashram or a temple, or putting yourself in a situation. Well, I guess even like the military might be a similar kind of thing. But
probably one of the worst ones.
Yeah, putting yourself in a situation where you spend most of your time interacting with people who think or have a similar framework. I guess, because chances are they don't think the way that you think. Chances are everyone's just as weird and unique in these places as they are anywhere else. But because even when I talk to my open-minded friends, like if there's just certain fundamental differences between the way that we think about things, there's just like there's either a limit to what I can talk about, or more so, I'm constantly re-justifying my own positions on things in relation to how they see things. And like I think doubt is useful, and there are certain ways of testing ideas that's useful, but I think sometimes it just kind of slows down momentum, I guess, or something that I have in terms of really exploring something deeply or developing something.
Press like on YouTube and press like on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube, iTunes and Pocket Casts. Follow us on Twitter at BattleAZ and Trouble Bubble, and show your support at donate.theparadiseparadox.com.
I don't think it matters. I don't think the bubble is so important. the company you keep is important, but how to put it? So, depending on who you are and what you do and your various refinements, you sit in a bunch of different places along, for instance, the bell curve. But I think it's important that, so if you imagine the bell curve not being two-dimensional, but having a third dimension whereby it can twist around on itself or tend towards a different axis or spectrum, then you can start placing these shapes together so that you, if your bell curve is interacting with another person who is likened to a bell curve, that they cross at least in two places, and hopefully at one of those places where they cross, they're at the exceptional end of the bell curve. They may not be at the other place where you cross, but at least at one of them, if they're exceptional, then that's great. You can grow and change with this person. But if you only cross once, and where you happen to cross on their bell curve is in the fat part or the retarded part, then I don't think you're going to have a engaging relationship. And if there's a group of people, and as a group where that group crosses your curve is a fat mediocre or mediocre part, then again, that's probably not the group for you. I think it's important, like the soil that you grow yourself in, and so much of our reality is based on our friends, our environment in an interpersonal sense. You know, when somebody looks at you, so the Nietzsche quote, I don't know it in its English translation, but it's basically, be careful, be careful when you study monsters, in case you become a monster, because when you stare into the abyss stares back at you. And I think it's beautiful, and this abyss can be another human being. And when somebody looks at you and you look at them looking at you, depending on how you see them, you create an image of yourself in their eyes. And knowing what you know about them and how they perceive the world, it changes your image, but pre-consciously. So I mean, that's why it's awesome to have a teacher, and also to see that teacher through the lens of a teacher. For instance, I have a teacher, a local teacher at my temple, and he's amazing. He's a Renaissance man. He's a painter and sculptor and philosopher and poet and monk. And so I try and serve him the way a student is supposed to serve their teacher in the Eastern framework. And he's very happy. Every time I serve him well, he's really happy. But if I was cynical, or if I didn't understand the principle of a teacher well, I would think that he's happy because I'm doing things for him. I'm making his life easier. Some personal gain that he's getting, and that's why he's happy. But the way I see it is, he's happy because he's looking at me as a student, and when he sees me being a good student, he's happy with my studentship, and that's what makes him happy. So this lens and this way of seeing other people is really important. And if I didn't trust him as a teacher, then maybe I wouldn't trust his intentions or his guidance. So I think it's so important, the people that we choose to have in our lives and the people we interact with. But that being said, if you read Dostoevsky's The Idiot, if you have a beautiful perspective, somebody who's mediocre will be great to you, and you can see greatness through their eyes, maybe more greatness than they can see through their actual eyes and their actual perspective. And so again, at the end of the day, I don't think it matters. But there's degrees of quality and degrees of advantage and disadvantage, and I quite like disadvantage. So that's probably why I think it doesn't matter, because it is still a disadvantage.
You did say something before that made me think about. Oh yeah, in terms of the principle stuff, like how you talk about. I mean, I took it personally, so you might not have necessarily been talking about this kind of thing. But in terms of having a principle, so for myself, I have various different principles about helping people and not being selfish and that kind of stuff. And I might break them all the time. But one time in which I totally give myself freedom from my discipline and my principles, well, quite a lot more than usual, is when I'm smoking. And so I will generally be disciplined and aim to not smoke. But then every so often I'll give myself a time where I can just get stoned and just do whatever I want. And during that time, when I am high particularly, I will make a whole bunch of decisions that I wouldn't let myself get away with usually. Like whatever it is, the awkwardness, the discomfort. I'm just not. I don't feel mentally capable of dealing with certain kinds of discomfort or not satisfying certain desires, like eating things or being in a comfortable situation or whatever it is. So I'll act in these other ways. And so what you're saying before almost sort of made it seem like my principles aren't really that strong if I can just give myself this out where in which I'll break them. And I mean, I'm a lot of these things, like some of my principles are, being honest with people or, and being generous, selfless, these kinds of things. And it's not like I'm a saint. But yeah, it's an interesting idea of if they were really principles, or if I really believed in them, I probably wouldn't put myself in a position where I could break them so easily.
Pish tish. So Aristotle, in his Ethics, which is quite a beautiful framework for ethics, he describes a process of hierarchicalization in ethics, whereby certain principles supersede other principles. So in cases like this, where you are looking at principles and their application, I think it's important to understand your own principles in terms of their hierarchy of values. So when you divest yourself of certain principles, you're serving what in your case is a higher principle. But maybe you don't have that higher principle codified. Maybe you have these more basic principles codified because they're easier to codify. Be honest with people, don't be selfish, etc., etc. But yeah, if you look at your way of life, it will show you what your higher principles are. And I don't think there's a problem at all in breaking principles for higher principles. At the temple where I'm staying, they run this detox program. Apparently, it's the hardest detox program in the world, and it was set up by two brothers who are monks and their aunt who ordained herself as a nun. She's a radical. But anyway, I digress. People complained about them because Buddhist monks aren't supposed to work, and they complained because they were treating women. And one of these monks, his response was, well, what are you going to do if no one else is doing it and you have to do it? Then you have to be willing to do what's necessary. And we're not supposed to touch women, but if there's a woman trapped in a burning house, well, what are you going to do? I think it's important, if you're a principled person, to be willing to break your own principles for a higher aim. Otherwise, you're just a bit of an asshole with a nice way of justifying it.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
But what is the principle at play there when Link gets high and then isn't so generous, or is a little selfish for a day. The principle is like enjoying himself and giving himself some time to relax and not worry so much about having everything perfect. Is that the principle, or is it something else?
I don't know. I don't think you can tell from the outside. I think that it's up to each individual to analyze their own life and work it out for themselves. I mean, because from the outside, outside,
their own needs.
You can never tell. Someone can be doing a very generous action with a very selfish intention, or someone can be doing something that seems very selfish, but it's actually a very generous intention. You can't really tell. You can only tell from the inside.
Yeah, well, I'll think about that, because when I think about the higher intentions, I can think of some higher principles. I can think of more just higher understandings, or like of who I am, or what's happening here, and that kind of stuff. That kind of things that also accept myself and who I am and where I'm at a little bit more. Yeah, and also I guess other things about in terms of taking responsibility. Like, so if I do have these selfish moments, or these things that are principles I'm breaking, whatever, like putting it actually into perspective and realize that me beating myself up over these things isn't necessarily helpful, or in relation to how bad I'm being, in inverted commas, how much I'm straying from my principles. So anyway, there's lots of things to think about there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have this principle whereby I avoid and disbelieve in guilt. I don't think it serves any kind of purpose to think negatively about the past, except in terms of creating some different system or schema for the future. Failure is an opportunity to grow. And if you couldn't see any failures inside yourself or in your past, then I would be very, very concerned for your mental health.
Well, another thing which that brings me to is a few months ago there was a prominent libertarian, Walter Block. He came out and endorsed Trump, and he said, "Let's get libertarians for Trump," and he said, "Well, we have to be pragmatic in this situation, even though Trump isn't a libertarian candidate and probably won't do a lot for liberty. He's just the best of the bad options," and so Block thought it was pragmatic to support him, but instantly everybody, a lot of libertarians came out and started pointing the finger and said, "Block, you're not a real libertarian. A real libertarian would never support Trump. Like he wants to build this wall and limit trade and all these sorts of things." And I found it so funny how people could be so fickle. Like here's a man who's dedicated most of his life to this cause, which these people are supporting, but just on a dime, they will turn on him and say, "You're not really what you've been for longer than I've been alive." And I thought that was so unfair, that you could judge someone on this one conclusion that he'd come to. I wrote this post about it, and my friend Erin said this comment which kind of sums it up nicely. And she said, "A person is more than his worst day. A person is so much more than his worst day." So it's so easy to look at one single thing and even in your own life, which is I think that's where it starts. Look at one thing that you've done and say, that was so terrible. I'm a terrible person, and you latch onto this like as an identity. But the thing is, you are this complete person, and it's so limiting when you see people as just one single action, one bad day in their life, and paint them with that entire brush. People are very complex, and if we want to have an understanding, and if we want to have compassion, then we have to attempt to look at people in their entirety.
Yeah, we have this idea of what's the expression? True colors. It's like a person acts a certain way and talks a certain way and thinks a certain way, but then that's not their true colors. They'll show their true colors in a certain circumstance, and then that's their actual personality or their actual self, for want of a better word. But it's so reductionist. It's so reductionist and simplistic. But again, I think it's a symptom of our culture, which is very reductionist and simplistic. Anytime you're reducing something, it is, I think, a dangerous activity. I mean, if you look at coding and information, when you want to make a principle or a general statement, that general statement or that principle should fit all of the information, all of it. If it doesn't, then it's not a very good description. That's why relativity rocked as a description in physics, because it described many more circumstances and actualities and points of information than the mechanical model did. There were all of these things that weren't described, that were reduced from the model in the earlier model. And so again, the dangerous thing about a framework is that, like a frame, there's an edge to it, and you want to be careful what's outside that edge, or where you position it to create an image inside of the framework. Like on cigarette packets, with all of this nocebo anti-smoking stuff, for a long time when you read the side of a pack of cigarettes, it told you all of these statistics about how many people died of this and that in these particular years. But it's dodgy information, because the year wasn't like the year before. The year was just some year. So it was obvious that the people who chose this year chose it because those were the most damning numbers. So that's a framework, and the edge of the frame has been lined up very carefully so as to create a certain image inside of that frame. But that image is not something that's trying to describe reality. It's a coercive image. I guess that, again, is one of my fears about codes and frameworks and ways of life. It's like you can set this thing up to create a pretty fantasy, or an ugly fantasy, if that's your choice. But yeah, I'm much more interested in trying to get towards actuality, or reality, for want of a better word, or actual experience.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting idea, the dangers of a code, and like I said, I guess it is enforced, like following, like you said before, like a monk not saving a woman in a burning house or something like that. That these codes are practical, like in terms of the practical philosophy as well. Like they're all for practical reasons. So there is going to be a limit to perhaps all of these principles, where in which, yeah, like I guess, and that's the danger. Like when you're talking about the trolley scenario, like creating abstract hypotheticals. Like I guess there is a use in thought experiments and such, but I guess I'm a bit wary of hypotheticals that I can't then ground back into a context and reality, because it's not. And I guess the other part is that just because I might find an exception to that principle, that doesn't mean that it's not useful in all these other situations. Kind of like, I guess, just because relativity exists doesn't mean that mechanical physics isn't still useful, kind of thing. Like, or stuff along those lines. So
yeah, well, I remember I was reading this article, and it was talking about this more of a shift to abstract thinking over the past couple of centuries. And the thing was, the article claimed that, say, a few hundred years ago, say you have like this intellectual who is a racist, but you ask him, well, so you think blacks should be treated a certain way, but I mean, think about it. Like, if you woke up tomorrow and you were black, then does that mean that you should be treated in that way? And he would say, well, that's a ridiculous question. I mean, that's never going to happen. That's so outside of reality that it's completely meaningless. I mean, reality is the way it is, and this is what we're going to do. So it's very strange, because you can set up these hypothetical situations which don't really have much to do with reality, and I guess in some circumstances they can be helpful, but it's hard to say when. Well, you have to look at it to see the principle that's actually being demonstrated there.
And I guess it's the difference between developing the theory and then testing the theory and experimenting with it. So the more abstract stuff might be much more useful in that developmental phase of coming up with the idea, but then you can separate the wheat from the chaff just by self-experimentation and checking it out in the environment.
Yeah, so you should probably find some dolphin porn.
Aha. That's right.
Dolphinsex.org.
I'm totally not following through with my practical philosophies. Oh no! I'm really not that attracted to dolphins. I mean, I like their demeanor
so you should probably find
and their
some dolphin
disposition. They're quite smooth and kind of shiny. I guess that's a bit somewhat sexual. That kind of those dimensions. Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking just then when I thought about touching one. I bet you they're coarse, which, and again, with the time when I kissed a man, the second time, one of the times that I kissed a man to kind of test out my theory of kissing men, one of the big put-offs was the beard. So if dolphins are already coarse, regardless of if
they're not actually
smooth or not. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm going to have to, maybe I don't consent. Well, I guess that's all right though, because I can still find it okay, even if I'm not into it, and
Thanks for listening. Thanks for opening your mind for 50 minutes consecutively to enjoy the fruits of our brain labor. Remember, you can follow us, like us, upvote us on Steemit, steemit.com/paradise-paradox, and it'll help us out, help us get a little money. Steemit, remember, is a platform where you can get paid for posting and curating and commenting. So check that out if you're an artist, a writer, musician. And you can also jump on to donate.theparadiseparadox.com. We are mostly supported by your donations, by your tips, so we do appreciate it when you give us a little bit of your hard-earned cash. Suggested donation $1 per episode that you like, just the ones you like. The ones that you hate, throw them in the trash, burn them, and put them on your mother-in-law's lawn. So thanks for listening, have a great day, and love yourself. Goodbye.